Hi. Good. Good to see you again. Hello, folks. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and try to take a seat or get in a comfortable place to hear the stories. We're about to begin.
It's pretty noisy in that end. And I'm going to grab to get Susan to take her seat. Haven't seen Leslie yet, haven't gotten a hold of her, so we might not have Leslie tonight, but...
Do you want me to?
What number was she? She's number 4.
Yeah, well, I know I got something from Leslie. I'm trying to find out
What do you have? Okay, it's fine. I'll let him know in just a second. Okay, well, if she makes it, we'll do that. If not, we'll have Joe we'll just go straight to Ed instead. So we'll just see if she shows up. I don't know. Okay.
Hey, guys. Hello. Can everyone hear me? All right. My name is Jay Ward, and I wanted to kick off by saying thank you so much for coming to tonight's event. As you know, that tonight is a live story event at the Moody Museum of Taylor. And the story, or the slogan for tonight, is Deep in the Heart of Taylor. My name is Jay Ward, and I became a Taylorite, I'd probably say, a little over a year and a half ago. My wife, Tricia, and I moved to town. And I started working with this board a couple months ago. I am very grateful to be a part of such a unique organization that really has, is keeping the foundations and history of throughout Taylor, and that's why this event means so much to me, and why I think it's such a great idea. All right. So we're going to go ahead and kick off. By the way, I'm sorry if I look at notes every once in a while. It's the reason why they exist. They're there for a reason. Tonight, we're going to go ahead and start with a little information on storytelling. I don't know how familiar I don't know how familiar you are with it, but it's actually it's interesting. So oral storytelling is a ancient and intimate tradition between a storyteller and their audience. The storyteller and the listeners are physically close, often together in a circular fashion. Through the telling of the story, people become physically close, developing a connection to one another through the communal experience, kind of the opposite of what's going on right now, making this a little bit awkward. And let's go ahead and do this. The storytellers reveal and share themselves through storytelling to their listeners, and their listeners reveal and share themselves through their reception of the story. The intimacy and the connection is deepened by the flexibility of oral storytelling, which allows the tale to be shaped according... Can y'all hear me now? Can you hear me any better?
Betty, can you hear any better?
Yeah?
Hold it close.
Can you hear me now? All right, sorry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and just kind of finish off with that. The intimacy and a connection is deepened by the flexibility of oral storytelling, which allows a tale to be shaped according to the needs of the audience and the location or environment of the storytelling storytelling basically creates a personal bond with the teller and the audience. All right. Yeah. I'm so good at this. All right. Now about tonight. The Moody Museum boards, Moody Museum board were pleasantly overwhelmed by the turnout of the speaker planning session. We knew we wanted to focus on Taylor's history, but where to start? After some discussion, it was decided that the central topic for our first event would be the women's roles in Taylor history. Tonight's stories, just FYI, tonight's stories are being recorded and transcribed for our archives, and they're being transcribed by the Williamson County Historical Commission. Okay? For a little personal etiquette, guys, a little housekeeping, here's some little directions from us. No talking, obviously. Whenever someone's telling a story, please don't talk unless they ask you questions. That's polite. And then for some questions and comments for the end of the show, or comment on our Facebook page if you want to ask questions. Please keep quiet, turn off your phones and other sound-making devices. Hold applause to a minimum until each story is complete. And no flash photography as it interferes with the Facebook Live recording, by the way, that's happening, and distracts the audience. Alrighty. So first on the list, our lucky guy, first to speak tonight, is Gumi Gonzalez. So per Google and Facebook, Gumi is a 1961 graduate of Taylor High. That's pretty impressive. And he loves the Dallas Cowboys, which is one of my favorite parts. There you go. And tonight, that was not me, that was Sang. And tonight, the story we'll be telling is The Sisters of St. John Bosco. It's a story about teaching the children of Our Lady of Guadalupe Church about the Catholic faith. Come on up, Gimme.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's not awkward at all. Saying what I do. Is that good?
There, right there. Thank you. My name is Gumi Gonzalez. I was born in McDade, Texas, the seventh member of a family of 16 brothers and sisters. My parents, Bernabé and Dolores Gonzalez, brought me to Taylor at the age of 6 years old. I was going to say that they had brought me here when I was little, but every time I say that, some of my brothers are here, they always say, well, Gumi, you're still little. I want to thank the Moody Museum and the Moody Museum President, Susan Komendowski, and all the other Moody Museum members. I want to thank also Jessie for all the work that she has done in getting us together. But I want to thank the Moody Museum for the work that the museum is doing to preserve the oral history of our community here in Taylor. And I want to thank Ms. Sissy Pierce in a special way for inviting me to be here today. Father Paul A. Lewis arrived in Taylor in 1946 to serve the community of Our Lady of Guadalupe. One of the things that Father Lewis saw was that our sister parish, St. Mary's, had a Catholic school. And so Father Lewis noticed that, wow, how wonderful that they were able to teach the children their Catholic faith. But Father Lewis said, well, what about the other children? Who's going to teach them their faith? So with that, Father Lewis decided that he was going to do something about that situation. Father Lewis came from Roma, Texas, And while he was there, he met a young lady. Her name is Guadalupe de la Paz, who taught the children religious education classes. Father Lewis invited Sister Lupe. After that, we always called her Sister Lupe. So Father Lewis invited Sister Lupe to come to Taylor in 1946. And immediately, Sister Lupe formed a community of sisters to teach the faith to the children. Sister Lupe and other young women from all over the country came to Taylor to help her teach the children our Christian faith. The young women who joined the community of sisters took their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience and lived a life of prayer. A convent was built in 1948 by the men of the parish. The convent was built in Washington Heights, a block away from the Taylor Country Club, which is now known as Mustang Creek Golf Club. At one point, the sisters numbered as many as 11 dedicated sisters to serve our parish, but also the surrounding parishes in Central Texas. The sisters served Our Lady of Guadalupe Taylor, Sacred Heart Elgin, St. William's Round Rock, St. Joseph's in Rockdale, St. Helens in Georgetown, Santa Rosa in Endice, and Good Shepherd in Lampazos. During the summer months, when many Hispanic families, including our family, migrated to Minnesota to work in the beet fields, the sisters worked in parishes in New York City in the barrios. As I mentioned, Sister Lupe was the Mother Superior of the community of sisters and had a profound love of Christ and of the church. I remember as I attended religious education classes that Sister Lupe made sure that she enforced a dress code. And this was when dress codes weren't even in style yet. Another thing that she was very diligent about is she made sure that every one of us attended religious education classes on Wednesday afternoons. And if we missed, she would go to our house and inform our parents that we were not in class. So I guarantee you that after she made a visit to the home, we were always in class. There were many other sisters that all of our community grew to love. And there are many other sisters that my wife and I remember, and we remember with fondness Sister Michael. Sister Michael was kind, gentle, and loving. She dedicated her whole life, and it showed in the love that she had for Christ above all things. When Sister Michael retired and moved to San Antonio to live, my wife Minnie and I visited with her one day. We took her to lunch and took her on a shopping spree. Sister Lucinda was another one of the sisters that my wife Minnie and I came to love very much for their dedication. She served approximately 25 years in the parish of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and she left the convent and moved to Fort Worth, where she worked for a parish as a director of religious education. As some of you may know, the sisters renew their vows after so many years, and they have an option to renew the vows or not renew the vows. If they don't renew the vows, they can move away from the convent and start a secular life. So Sister Lucinda left the convent and went to work for another church in Fort Worth. Anyway, later on, she met a young man. They married, and they adopted two young boys from South America. And I had the sacred honor and the privilege to baptize their oldest child. And so I always remember the work that they did for us to build our faith and to bring us up in the faith to receive our sacraments. The other sister that we remember, the last remaining sister, was Sister Joseph. Sister Joseph loved Christ and loved the children of the parish, but she also had a wonderful sense of humor, and she was real witty. I remember one day Sister was picking flowers on the side of the road because she wanted to bring them on the month of May. She wanted to decorate the altar with these beautiful wildflowers. And I said, Sister Joseph, don't you know that it's against the law to be picking flowers off the side of the road? Sister Joseph said, well, I'll tell you what, if they stop me and they ask me why am I doing that, I'm going to tell them that the master, the owner, needs them. As I said, Sister Joseph was the last one of the sisters that was remaining. And while she was there, one of the ladies in the parish asked her, Sister Joseph, aren't you afraid to be there in the convent all by yourself? She said, I'm not there by myself. God is with me. As I said, Sister Joseph was the last surviving member of the dedicated women of St. John Bosco Convent. She died on January the 21st, 2016, at the age of 92. She served the parish of Our Lady of Guadalupe for 69 years. She and the other sisters dedicated their whole lives to serve Christ in the service to the community of Our Lady of Guadalupe and Taylor. From 1946 until 2016, the Sisters of St. John Bosco served 3 generations of parishioners and instructed the children in our Catholic faith. And it was through their efforts that many of us were instructed in the practice of the faith and received all of our sacraments. As the community of Our Lady of Guadalupe and the city of Taylor, we should be forever grateful for the tremendous amount of work that the sisters have done for our community. We will always remember the Sisters of St. John Bosco when we read the scripture passage from the Gospel of Matthew 25:21 that says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you were faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibilities. Come and share your master's joy." Thank you.
For Irene. Hey, thank you, Gumi. Thank you so much. Introducing our next speaker, which is going to be Susan. Susan is kind enough to be speaking for Irene Mikna. A little background on Irene Mikna. I'm going to go ahead and do the introduction for you. Irene Mikna is a Taylor historian, author, and keeper of the Williamson County Old Settlers Association in its 115th year. Unfortunately, she was unable to join us here this evening due to a bad reaction to chemo treatments. Presenting for her notes is the Moody Museum Advisory Board Chair, Susan Komendonsky.
Jay, can I use that? That's easier. This is too low. Irene called me this afternoon, and she was very distressed that she could not be here tonight. And she said, I've written it all out, so I just need somebody to read it for me. Some of you know Irene. Her family has been in Williamson County since probably the early 1800s, mid-1800s. She did a family exhibit here at the Moody a few years ago. And the story she wanted to tell you tonight was about the last trail drive from Williamson County. She said, Taylor's known for being the king of cotton, the railroad, and for the last cattle drive to leave this area. Her great-grandfather, Greenup Kirkendall, was born in 1850 and was a true Texas pioneer. Typical of frontier days, he spent his 86 years in Williamson County representing that noble type of early Texan who endured many hardships to lay the foundation of our present social order. He rode the Chisholm Trail when there were comparatively few people in Texas, hardly any schools or churches, and where there wasn't an house in all the Indian Territory, now known as the state of Oklahoma. In the late 1860s, longhorns sold for between $1 and $2 per head in Georgetown. But if they could be driven north to the markets there, they could be sold for as much as $20 per head. On his first trip in 1870, he was 20 years old. The next year and ever afterward, he was the trail boss. He led the largest herd of cattle ever driven up the trail from Texas. There were 3,600 head in that largest herd ever, with 300 being his own. And this one trip kept him away from home for 10 months. Trail drives including the one in 1870 to Ellsworth, Kansas, in 1875 to Chicago, Illinois, in 1878 to Oakley, Nebraska, and in 1879 to Sidney, Nebraska. In 1885, Greenup and other trail herders, including unemployed soldiers that needed work after the Civil War, left Taylor after grazing there for a while and headed to Georgetown. This is noted to be the last cattle drive to leave Williamson County. Going up the trail, it was necessary to pass through the Indian Territory, and cattlemen always took along wares with which to bargain and trade with the Indians. To do this in the 1870s, you had to have a license. She said his license stated, "To all whom it may concern, be it known that I have this day granted a license to Greenup Kirkendall to trade in a wagon for the term of 3 months according to the Act of the National Council regulating trade in the Cherokee Nation." In later years, Greenup was the foreman of the Sparks Ranch near Thrall that was owned by the governor of Nevada. At the ranch, he had in his employment a man named Will Pickett. On this ranch is where steer wrestling was originated by Will, we better know him as Bill Pickett. And she says also Greenup gathered cattle in roundup on land where the city of Taylor now is located, and he was sitting on his horse when the first lot in Taylor was sold. Greenup married Josephine Kimbrough in 1884, and they had 5 sons and 3 daughters. His brother, Sparks Kirkendall, was Williamson County Constable in Precinct 6 for over 7 years. Greenup passed away in 1936, and these are the kind words that were spoken about him. Honesty. He helped create the code of ethical conduct on and off the trail that made his word as good as his bond. Always neat in appearance, clean and active and courteous, with the natural aristocratic bearing of a prince, and of course, never without his Stetson hat. And that's the story that Irene wanted to celebrate, to share with you all tonight. And I'm hoping that at some point in the future she can be here to share another story, because they were early pioneers in this area.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Susan. Alrighty, working on down our list of speakers. Up next is Janetta McCoy. You may know Janetta. She is, if you don't know, well, now you know, she is the owner of the historic Pecan Manor Bed and Breakfast. She's a local architectural preservationist and she is also a PhD grad and professor at 2 universities. Correct? Thank you. And tonight, Janetta will be just telling the story, Women Behind the Men, Hannah Boyle Murphy and Grace Boyle Murphy Dillinger. A story of 2 women who played a prominent role in Taylor's cultural and economic development.
I didn't know he knew all that about me. It's a little scary. So keep your image of that last trail drive in your head, because that's kind of the time frame we're going to start talking about what happened with the Murphy Dillinger family. What he didn't say was, I bought this house that changed my life. I knew I wanted to do historic preservation. I didn't know how much work it was. Oh my God. But, so my approach is about these 2 women who lived in my house. Or I get to live in their house, actually, is the way it works. History tends to tell us mostly about accomplished men. And in this room, there are some amazingly accomplished men. But when you hear those stories, they often neglect to talk about the role of the women in their lives and how they might have played into their efforts. Mothers, wives, daughters likely influence those men, but often do not become part of the story. However, the women each have their own story of accomplishment, integral and influential in their achievements. For the past 7 glorious years, can you believe it's been 7 years living in the Murphy Dillinger home, I have come to appreciate the efforts of both Dan Murphy and J.W. Dillinger, but equally appreciate the women in their lives who Mrs. Murphy and Mrs. Dillinger did some pretty hard work as well. This is just not quite wide enough for 2 sheets of paper, just so you know. Dan Murphy was a landed Irish immigrant who found Taylorville as he came working on the railroad, coming south from Dallas or from Fort Worth, working for the railroad. 1873, Dan recognized the potential that Taylor had, a place he could call home. So he stayed. 1873 is about when that trail drive was happening. So life was the Wild West. That's 3 years before the city was incorporated in 1876. The population was very small. He had met a nice woman in Palestine, but he thought the town was and living conditions were rough, too rough for this sweet young thing to bring her here. There were other kinds of women in Taylor at the time that probably wouldn't have been a good influence on their marriage. So it took 2 years before he was willing to bring her here. By the time Hannah Boyle Murphy came to Taylor with her infant daughter, Dan had secured a place for them to live and had begun his journey to success and begun to acquire land. Eventually, he built a house on 7th Street, where the old Taylor High School is. Starting out, Taylor's life here in Taylor must have been hard. Her family was in Palestine. I'm sure she was lonely. In Taylor, there were no conveniences. This is a little bit hard to read, I've got to say. There were no conveniences. There was no running water. Of course, there was no electricity, no transportation, no paved streets. Life was hard for a young woman who was having babies. Think about that. Mostly she had to grow her own food or trade with other struggling residents in the town. Water had to be hauled and purchased by the barrel. Perhaps that's why Dan Murphy and his cousin George Burkett decided to commercialize the artesian well on his property. You're probably all familiar with the property around Taylor Park or Murphy Park. Murphy's estate eventually stretched from 7th Street to Lake Drive, from Main Street to Davis. That includes this property right here. I don't have any record of that deed, but in talking with Susan, the time frame would have been about right because this house was built about 1883. Food grown in Mrs. Murphy's vegetable garden relates directly to that story about the cows, the trail drive. She was good at gardening, probably, and grew a lot of their own food because they didn't have an H-E-B to go to in those days, to say the least. But there are stories about how distressed she was when she saw a big cloud of dust coming over the horizon, and it was a cattle drive coming to the railroad depot. And guess what they trampled was her garden. That meant it was going to be a long winter if she couldn't find other food other places. Because I can't garden because I don't know what I'm doing out there, but that's another story. The Murphys became prominent in Taylor. Dan's building and contracting business was in much demand as Taylor grew. Hannah, who had worked hard in the early years, found life a little easier with time. Dan's success allowed him to build several new houses along 7th Street, some of them for his cousins, his other relatives. About 1890, Dan tore down the first house that he had built on 7th Street and built a new, larger one, apparently the one that I now live in. It had the same address. It was designed by architect Henry Struve, S-T-R-U-V-E. This house had a bedroom designed for a maid. Life was getting a little bit easier. Now she could entertain out-of-town guests. And when those out-of-town guests came, they came with a trunkload of clothes. So this new house had a trunk room. It's now a bathroom, but my folks don't come with trunks. They don't want to carry them upstairs, for one thing. Hannah and Dan raised 3 children. Grace, the baby that came with Hannah, Dan Jr., and Joseph here in Taylor. Sadly, Dan was killed in an accident at an early age. Joseph married and moved to Wenatchee, Washington. That's where all those apples come from. I assume that's why he went there. Grace Boyle Murphy, stepsister to her brothers, though raised with some advantage and privilege, married a local boy with none of her advantage. James Dellinger had worked for Mr. Murphy in a variety of capacities since he was 15 years old, including at the ice house. And my gathering of information makes me think that's probably where they met. And since he was 15 and she was about the same age, you know how biology works. James had been working since he was 15. His life had been difficult in some ways. He was born in Illinois and came to Taylor to live with his grandparents after his parents died. He was 6 years old when he came here. I don't know the full story, but as an orphan in 1886, young James Dellinger would not have had much social standing in this community. Without parents, who are you, even though he's lived with his grandparents? Still, Grace and J.W. were married in 1898. Dan Murphy died a year later. Hannah died a year after that. Dan had been a good father and was concerned about his daughter marrying a man with apparently little to offer. So in an effort to protect her, it is told that Dan made a deal with the city that J.W. Dellinger would always have a job. I don't know how you make that kind of deal. What do you, how do you, Mayor? I don't know. I've read that, I've heard it, I don't know. In the first years of their marriage, Grace and J.W. tried a number of jobs to earn a living, including managing at least 2 hotels. One of them was named the Grace Hotel, after Grace, and the other one was a hotel site where the Blossomer now stands, such as it is. We won't talk about that. When his parents died, Joseph Dellinger inherited the house. But after Joseph Murphy, after Joseph Murphy moved to Washington, then the house came into the possession of Grace and J.W. Dellinger. There they raised 3 children, James Jr., Johanna, and Grace. Although Mr. Murphy had been concerned that J.W., or James, might not be able to take care of Grace in the style to which she had become accustomed, it probably was an unnecessary concern. He joined the police force in 1916. He became chief of police in 1920. I'm nervous, I guess, so I get emotional when I talk in front of people. That's all I can say. 1920, he became chief of police. And for the next 36 years, he was chief of police and sometimes fire chief as well. So think about what the world was like in 1916 and what it was like in 1956. I can tell you 1956, I assume, looked a whole lot different from 1916. He was so successful, there are many letters in his file from J. Edgar Hoover congratulating him on a variety of successful ventures. He was a contemporary of Dan Moody, although I don't have any record yet of how that relationship might have worked, but while one was doing his work, the other was doing his work at the same time. Mrs. Dellinger became an iconic social leader, taking the role quite seriously. Not only did she teach English in the Taylor High School, she also taught elocution and social graces to the young high school girls who were preparing to attend dances and other social events. Let's make sure they know how to act when they are entertained. Those were important things in 1948. They were a prominent family whose activities were regularly recorded in the local Taylor Daily Press. 1922. Suddenly, 1922, what was the world like in 1922? Well, again, Mr. Murphy had made a deal with the city that when they were ready to build their first high school, he made this deal in 1881, by the way. In 1922, the city came calling and said, we'd like to execute that deal now. We'd like to build the high school on your property where your house is. So he honored it. The city gave him $24,000 for that 6.5 acres. And Mr. Dellinger put his house up on logs and moved it over to its current location, about 1,000 feet away. I don't know how they did that either. So deals, moving houses without hydraulic lifts, I don't know. That was a pretty exciting time. The social pages in the Taylor Daily Press were filled with stories about the Dellinger family, including one that said, let me read this so I know exactly what. The social pages spoke of various afternoon soirees, train trips, and even her Christmas wreath. It was reported that seeing Mrs. Dellinger's Christmas wreath on their front door was a sure sign of the coming season. The fact that it was December. Richard, where are you? At one time, little Jimmy Dellinger suffered from appendicitis. His surgery, hospitalization, and recovery was reported on a daily basis on the front page of the Taylor Daily Press. I don't never him if I would have wanted that. Such is life. By the late 1930s, Jimmy Dellinger had become interested in congressional politics and was a big LBJ supporter. Of course, I used to think that was a really big deal, but then some of the older folks told me this was LBJ territory and he was in everybody's house. But he came to my house too, and evidently Jimmy was really interested, and Mr. Dellinger was a big supporter of LBJ, and they became good friends over the years. There is evidence of him of LBJ coming to Taylor specifically to see the Dellingers. Stories from Mrs. Dellinger's grandchildren include coming to lunch during the high school years. Grace Mary said, guess who's sitting here? Grace Mary, the oldest daughter, the oldest child, said she walked across the street every afternoon, every day at lunch, to have lunch with her grandparents. James said he came mostly on Fridays. Buzz said he was never invited. Oh. Another story about Mrs. Dellinger and the fact that she really did have to work pretty hard was about laundry. You know, women, think about it, 1916 to 1956, he was chief of police. And his routine was, according to these people sitting here, is he would get up in the morning, get dressed, come down to breakfast, out the door, spend the morning doing what chiefs of police do, come back in at lunch, head straight upstairs, wash up, change his shirt, come down for lunch. And at 5 o'clock, he did the same thing. He changed shirts at least 3 times a day. She did not have a washing machine. She did not have an electric iron. Those cotton or linen shirts had to be ironed, starched and ironed. And I was feeling really, really sorry for her. But then some of the old folks reminded me she had a maid. Chances are, however, that maid never did any of those shirts because you could go downtown and a laundry would do your shirt for 3 cents. Wash it, starch it, iron it, and return it to you on the same day. So life was different. Sadly, Mrs. Dellinger passed away in 1952. She was mourned by her family and Chief Dellinger as one of Taylor's most gracious hostesses. The Dellinger children produced a number of grandchildren. One of Grace's are with us tonight. Buzz Gary, his wife Susan, assorted children and grandchildren and husbands and wives, and I'm really glad you're here. It's great. Of all achievements, Dan Murphy might likely say his best achievement was achieving the city's water supply. You can't grow a city without water. But you know, the first thing he wanted to do was to get his wife here. I think that's a love story. J.W. Dellinger might list that keeping the trust and confidence of the Taylor citizens for 40 years might be his most significant achievement. But it was his wife who grounded him, gave him a sense of community, made him part of this community. I'm almost done. So in conclusion, today there are streets in Taylor named Murphy, street named Dellinger. There is a Murphy Park, which was part of his estate. I'd like to think that the public honors are meant both for the men and for the women of the Murphy and Dellinger families. Thank you.
Thank you, Janetta.
Joe? Can I say something real quick? Yes, sir. I want to thank Janetta because that that really is a wonderful house. And it is in so much better shape now because she's taken such good care of it. And I want to publicly thank you.
Thank you, Janetta. I'm Joe Burgess, president of Friends of the Moody Museum. And I just want to say, man, can you imagine a small hometown museum having exciting and meaningful events like this? And of course, I'm sure some of you have been visited the Bullock, hey, the Bullock State History Museum in Austin at some point in time, and of course our Williamson Museum in Georgetown, and now they have a location in Round Rock. And I hope you've seen some of the amazing displays and events that they have sponsored. Well, the Moody Museum in Taylor, Texas is working its way up to their level of programming. But make no mistake about it, if we ain't having fun, we ain't doing it. So, question, have any of you participated in our race and ethnicity program that we put on last year? Our Jimmy Heap program this spring that featured his music? Our annual Victorian galas, where we have pianists playing this 1901 piano that Mary and her mother both played? And our annual veterans events that features memorabilia from America's wars. Moody Museum volunteers are not only caring for this wonderful 1887 home and its incredible contents, they are also developing outreach programs, digitizing historic documents related to Governor Dan Moody 1920s era, and sponsoring events like this. I urge you to support our efforts and join our team in this very worthy, tailor-made cause. Become a friend of the Moody. I want to especially thank our event organizer and Friends board member, Jessie Turnbow-Cow, and her husband, Sang Cow, who is handling our recording equipment and sound equipment. Friends board member Jay Ward, our MC tonight, and technical advisor for our museum programs. Thank you, Jay. You just got promoted. Ben Sands on the guitar. Thank you, Ben. Museum Advisory Board Chair, Susan Komendowski, and Advisory Board member, Sissy Pierce, who've helped put this all together, and of course, the City of Taylor. They've worked hard to pull all this together, and we want to thank the support from the Taylor Press, and of course, the Texas Beer Company. We have city council members and staff in attendance here tonight, and members of the Williamson County Historical Commission. Thank you for coming over. And of course, the brave folks who volunteered to share a Taylor tale here tonight. We've assembled quite an all-star cast of volunteer characters here, don't you agree? Our next storyteller was supposed to be Leslie Hill. She couldn't make it tonight, but that's okay. We'll get her later on in the year. But I just want to make a couple of comments about Leslie because she was recognized as a Texas woman of distinction and the first African-American female honored as Taylor's Citizen of the Year. She was the first African-American to become a Taylor Rotarian and served as the local president and as assistant district governor. Anyway, like I say, we'll catch her later on in the year. So does anybody here not know Ed Komendowski? Okay. Well, I'm gonna let Jay introduce you, Ed.
Thank you, Joe. So my introduction for Ed's going to be kind of short. So I came up to Ed earlier today, and I asked him, I was like, is there any key call-outs you want me to go ahead and say? And he gave me a laundry list of things. And I was like, okay, well, let's just go ahead and keep it short. So we're going to go ahead and give this title to him for, just in case you don't know, he is retired colonel, which I think makes him more than capable of telling the story, telling Taylor folks in uniform, which is a story about the men and women who served in the U.S. military from the early days of Taylor to today. All right? Come on, Ed. Would you like this or this?
Let me put a postscript to Janetta's story, and Buzz knows this story too, that LBJ did come to Jimmy's funeral. I was fortunate enough to be serving as editor down at the Taylor Press back in those days, and the funeral was at the only funeral home we really had here at that time, Condor Funeral Home, and I hid in the bushes beside the funeral parlor because the police had blocked off all the roads. You couldn't, the LBJ, I mean, even as past president, he had a lot of security yet. So I kind of hid in the bushes back there, and as he got out of the car to come up the main walkway, I did snap his picture, and it's somewhere in the press archives, I think. But he and the Dellingers were very good friends. As you might suspect, after Taylor was founded in 1876, several of the folks around town, and I ascribe to the old theory that we find in the Constitution that people who carry guns were supposed to be part of the organized militia. The Supreme Court doesn't agree with me, but that's their prerogative. Anyway, about a couple of years after the founding of Taylor, a group got together known as, and they called themselves the Taylor Rifles. And they were the forerunners of the National Guard Company that was founded here later on. And the predecessors are still, is that the right word, predecessors? I don't know. Are still in operation here. We've had a National Guard unit here in Taylor, in other words, from about the turn of the 20th century. Well, one of the more interesting things about the Taylor Rifles, and you can see there is a stained glass window that Jerry Frankeny redid that's it's now called the United Christian Church at the corner of 6th and Talbot, was the first Christian church, and then they merged with another church. And in one of those stained glass windows, you'll find the name Taylor Rifles, and it tells who donated it. I don't remember the name who donated it, but the most interesting member of the Taylor Rifles was a guy named Booth. You may recognize that name. Mendel Booth, as he was called, was one of the founders of the old Taylor National Bank. His family was very prominent. There's a Booth Street in Taylor. There's a big house out on Lake Drive that he built. But everybody called him Cap Booth because he was the Taylor Rifles captain, Captain Booth. Everybody called him in town, called him Cap Booth. Cap is an interesting character because while he was president of the bank, he would take the train to Dallas to the bankers convention, but he had a propensity to spend a lot of money that he didn't intend to at night. And so he took just a small amount of money with him. And every morning, the guy who was left in charge of the bank down here would get a telegram from him saying, "Send me another $100. And that went on for a week or so, But anyway, Cap was an interesting guy. He was very disappointed, though, because when the militia was called up for the Spanish-American War, much to his disgust, the Taylor unit was not called up, and the Georgetown unit was, and he was just furious. And I tend to think that was the cause of the rivalry between Taylor and Georgetown that exists to this day. I'm probably wrong about that, but it makes a damn good story. Well, following the Spanish-American War, things kind of settled down a little bit. I imagine the militia guys, they were also known not only for their marksmanship, but they had great social activities, and we'll just leave it at that. World War II did not involve the United States until 1917. President Woodrow Wilson tried like the heck to make sure the Americans didn't get involved in that war, but eventually had to. And several prominent people from Taylor, and I'll mention some names as we go along, participated in that war. Among them were the Loon brothers. Many of you may remember the Loon and John's drugstore that used to be at the corner of, 3rd and Main. Russell Loon was a pharmacist there. His brother Graham Loon was involved in the war, as were a couple of other of their brothers. And Graham was killed in the war. And after the war, about 1919, various veterans of World War I organized the American Legion. And the local post was named for Graham Loon, and to this day out in Murphy Park, you will find the American Legion Hall has a plaque on it in honor of Graham Loon. Another member, or the very first commander of the American Legion post out there in Murphy Park, was none other than our own Dan Moody, whose house we now sit in. He was the first commander. Now, he did not go to the war, and he tried to enlist, as I understand, but because he was the only son of a widow, they wouldn't take him in the regular army, so that's when he joined the National Guard. And he stayed in the National Guard for a couple of years and later on resigned his commission because he got busy being a district and county attorney. Following World War I, in the late 1920s into the 1930s, Taylor, along with every other community in the country, suffered from the Great Depression. And everybody was worried about making a living and not so much about what we were doing overseas. But while we were worried about, we, folks in Taylor and all over the country, were worried about making a living, excuse me, the folks in Europe had their own problems. And eventually war broke out there in 1939. Well, there were a number of people here in Taylor, and I'll mention some more names that many of you may be familiar with, who participated, obviously, in World War II. The country went from a standing army of about 160,000 men. Just imagine that now, 160,000, to by the end of the war, there were over 8 million Americans in uniform. Now, this is where I tip my hat to the ladies, because many of those were women who participated not only in uniform, but especially taking their husbands and brothers and fathers' place on the defense assembly lines. That's where Rosie the Riveter got her name and so on, and became pretty famous in their own way. But let me mention a couple of names from Taylor here that you'll remember or know. Joe Staborik. Joe was a sergeant in the Army Air Corps and was the assistant navigator, I think was his correct title, in World War II. And he was the assistant navigator on the Enola Gay, which dropped the first atomic bomb. So that's an interesting thing. Another one was Erwin Tegeman. Many of you may remember Mr. Tegeman. He was actually captured and was a prisoner of war for many years, and later became president of the State 36th Division Association. That was the type of unit that the National Guard evolved into, was the 36th Infantry Division. By the way, still in existence, headquartered over in Austin. There were others that you may remember. Ross Wilder was in the Army Air Corps. He flew with Doolittle in his first raid into or over Japan. I don't know if you'll remember, there's a guy named Sidney Pierce. Sidney Pierce turned out to be the first person from Taylor who died in World War II. And the VFW post is named for him. His brother, Phil Pierce, is still living in Austin and occasionally visits over here to the Moody Museum. Lots of stories about World War II, but let me give you one that I think would focus your attention just a bit, and that's on a guy named John Bruner. Anybody recognize that name? He was the postmaster in Taylor. And back in those days, when you got a telegram from the Army or the military, it wasn't good news. And John Bruner had to deliver those telegrams. And he did it whether it was during the day, at night, on the weekend. He would personally take those notifications of death to the families personally. And he did that in both World War I and II. After World War II, everybody again hoped that was the last time we'd see military action, but it was not to be. There followed the Korean War. There were members from Taylor who participated in that. Then we have the Vietnam War. It's interesting that most of the official government documentation does not refer to Korea or Vietnam or even the issues in Iraq and Afghanistan as really as official wars. Their conflicts, their offensive actions, their police actions, anything but the word war. But among those who served in Vietnam that you may be familiar with were Benny McCook. I think some of you may know Benny. Chuck Nallen, who was a helicopter pilot, got shot down, was a guest speaker here a couple of times ago. My brother and I both served in Vietnam. And a guy named Jerry Kidwell, who many of you may not know, but is the current commander of the VFW. Then we have the Gulf War, Afghanistan. Buzz? I didn't know that, Buzz. Oh, I see. He's not the belly he's showing me, it's the belt buckle. Those who served in Afghanistan or Iraq that are still around and you can visit with include Nathan Davis. Anybody know Nathan? He's the current general manager down at Condra Funeral Home. Joe Meller. Joe Meller is a past commander of the VFW. And Scott Dean, who is the current commander of the American Legion. So all of these people served. I think what we need to remember is Taylor and its citizens never shirked their responsibility when it came to defending their country. And I'm sure Buzz and I would have stories to tell you about the people who drafted us. I know that's how I got there. You know, it wasn't by choice, but when my time got called, I went. And I'm sure there were a lot of others who did the same thing. So I think we need to remember that the citizens of Taylor are also good citizens of the United States.
For those of you who aren't familiar with this, on November the 4th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we will be honoring veterans here at the museum. We're asking all local veterans and or their families, surviving families, to create shadow boxes that we will put on display. And this year we are commemorating World War I. And we're going to have a very nice display of some memorabilia from World War I, which is where Dan Moody would have served, had he served. And so we would love to have you back here that day. And if you have a veteran or know of a veteran, let them know about our event. And I'm going to infringe on Ed's time just a minute and tell you a story that Irene Mickna told me, and he didn't share it. During World War II, Irene's father was called up, and Irene was born while he was off at basic training. And when they were shipping out, the train that was carrying them to their destination came through Taylor, and the train crew did not have permission to stop. But they knew that there were a great many local men aboard the train, and so they slowed down and inched through Taylor as slow as they could possibly go. And Irene's mother took her down to the railroad tracks and held her up because that was the first time her father ever saw her. So the wars don't just affect the men that went off and served in them, they affect the families back home too.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Ed. All right, guys, our last speaker of the night is going to be our recently elected mayor, Mr. Brant Rydell. I'm going to go ahead and leave that as the main introduction. The reason why is because I find it very funny that the mayor is going to read the story for us. And it's going to be the unmercifully whipped, a story of school corporal punishment in 1887, Taylor. Come on up.
I figured we'd end this on an up note, you know. We start off with Catholic nuns, or we're ending with corporal punishment in schools. But, well, again, I want to thank the Moody for hosting this event. It's wonderful. I've really enjoyed listening to all the stories. For those of you who don't know, I'm Brant Rydell. It's my honor and privilege to serve as a mayor of the city of Taylor. I'm in my second year now as mayor. But I also serve as vice president of the Taylor Conservation and Heritage Society. And it's in that capacity that, about 3.5 years ago, a few members of the group started talking to me about different things we could do as a society to have more of an outreach in the community, more engaging, and a way to bring in some revenue for the society. And they mentioned it would be great if Taylor had a ghost tour. And a couple of these folks were kind of new to Taylor. And asked me if I knew any ghost stories. I said, well, I knew a lot of ghost stories in Taylor, but it was haunted houses, including one I live in. And but that wasn't very conducive to a tour. You had to drive people all around town. So we need to focus on something very concentrated, like a walking tour of downtown. And I just didn't have any ghost stories from downtown. And I didn't really have any kind of bloody, murderous kind of stories, which would be good for a ghost tour. But I committed to researching to see what I could come up with. And considering Taylor was an old railroad town from 1876, I shouldn't have worried about bloody and murderous stories in Taylor, because we have it in spades, I can assure you. You know, I was concerned that I was going to be able to fill out an 1.5 hour long walking tour of downtown Taylor. I'd say conservatively, I have about 6 or 7 hours of stories of downtown Taylor. And, I would have used this as a pitch, because we've been doing the tour now for 3 years, and we hold them over consecutive weekends in October. So it'll be next Saturday night and the following Saturday night. We do 2 tours a night. And I would be here to try to sell some tickets. But this thing has been so successful that we sell out within a week of the tickets going up. And so this past year, or here within the last month when we put the tickets up, we sold half the tickets within a few days, and then we're completely sold out within 2 weeks. So really looking forward to the tour this year. Now, I mentioned that there's a lot of material to work with from downtown Taylor with its history. And to give you a hint or an indication of what Taylor was like back then, if you haven't already kind of gleaned that from some of the comments earlier, I have a quote on the back of this shirt from our Haunted Taylor tour, and it's from N.C. Schlemmer, who was the Taylor station master from 1878 to 1880. And years later, as he was reflecting on his life and writing his memoirs, he wrote of his time at Taylor that Taylor was a regular El Dorado of toughs and a hellhole of saloons and gambling houses. So that's our heritage. So in researching the history of Taylor, I was really focusing on things that happened in downtown. But I'd run across some great stories that didn't have any real connection to downtown Taylor, but were just, and maybe, didn't involve murder or anything like that, but were just so striking to me that I was like, man, I got to find a way to tell some of these stories. Well, this is an opportunity to tell one of those. So, and since the theme was women in Taylor history, I'm kind of stretching this, but there's a couple of women involved in this story. So, all right, the time is May of 1887, and there's a guy named James Trim, Trim, and he lives just south of Taylor, and it's his wife and children live out there, and he sends his children to school here in Taylor, and one of his boys comes home from school one day, and he's very upset, crying, because he had been disciplined in school, and his teacher had whipped him, and he was very upset. So this angered James Trim, which this is kind of surprising to me from 1887. I thought, as a matter of course, you just went to school and got beat. That was kind of what happened. And you got home, and then your parents found out, and they'd beat you again. But no, but Mr. Trim got very upset about this, and he wrote a very angry letter to this teacher, a female teacher in Taylor, and he told her that she was a horrible teacher and a horrible person, and that if she were a man, he'd come to the school and whip her himself to teach her a lesson. So, anyway, the note went to school. A night or two later, Mr. Trim and his wife and kids had retired to bed, and during the night, there was a knock on the door. Mr. Trim opens the door to find 7 armed men on his doorstep. And they order him to come out into the yard because they need to talk to him. So he goes outside, and they say that they were aware of the letter that he sent to this female teacher, the very threatening letter, and that they were going to show him what a whipping was. And at this time, Mr. Trim's wife came out onto the porch to try to intervene, and she had a pistol put in her face, and she was ordered back into the house. So Mr. Trim is hauled down the street, or down the road, and is gone for about 30 minutes. When he is returned to the house, he's dumped on the front porch, and he's got bruises and lacerations all over him. And one of the men of the party, of the vigilantes, hands Mrs. Trim a set of rail tickets. And he tells her that she and her husband and kids need to be on the next train out of Taylor and not come back. So they do that. They leave town, but they come back a few weeks later because they were able to successfully identify many of the people in the party, and were able to cooperate with local law enforcement to get warrants out for the rest of these vigilantes. So anyway, that was 1887 in Taylor, and the story of James Trim and his issues with local education. So anyway, the feel-good story, and I wish that we had more availability on our ghost tours, because I would invite any and all of you to come out, and we're going to see about trying to make this a more regular occurrence, because there's just so many stories to share about Taylor, and they're and I find them some of the most interesting stories. They're not the ones that the Chamber of Commerce would necessarily promote, and I again, touching on a theme that's kind of pervaded some of this. We've got murdered hookers, murderous hookers. We've got beheadings. We've had floggings. We have people being blown up. I mean, it's a laugh a minute, on this ghost tour. But anyway, and that's one of the things that I grew up here in Taylor, and my family goes back a few generations here, and that's one of the things that I really love about this community is the rich history it has, and it's not all the sanitized, whitewashed stuff. It's kind of, Taylor's been a gritty town, and its early days were certainly rough and tumble, and it's got a lot of character to it and a lot of characters in its history. And we love telling those stories at the Taylor Conservation and Heritage Society. So thank y'all again for having me, and thanks to the Moody for putting this on.
Thank you, Mayor. I tell you what, it's been an exciting one tonight, huh? And guess what? We're going to have a lot more of these. So stay tuned to your local newspaper, and we'll keep you informed on the next ones that we have, probably at 3 or 4 month intervals, I would think. So, anyway, I want to thank the Texas Beer Company, the Taylor Press, and of course the City of Taylor. This is a city museum. All the volunteers that helped us set all this up. Ben Sands on the guitar. Thank you for being here tonight, Ben. Sang Cal, Jay Ward, our MC, and of course Jesse for all of the work and ideas that you put into this. We really appreciate it. Thank you for attending tonight. Please drive safely. We don't want any more horrible tales. Y'all have a good evening. Thank you.
There's refreshments. If we leave, where can we put a donation if we'd like to? There is a pretty pink box sitting over there.
We do accept donations, but and by the way, there's still goodies out there and a keg on the front porch. But thank you.